acceptable. It is not American. It is not what this country is about, and we will not accept it. A few weeks ago, this administration ripped up the union contracts for 47,000 TSA agents across the country. It was illegal. It was brazen, and then they did it anyway. We warned in our first town hall call that this wouldn't be the end of this union busting, that the Trump-Musk administration was coming after all of us. Then, over 10,000 people were fired in mass layoffs at the Department of Health and Human Services. This comes on top of tens of thousands of layoffs that have already taken place. Last week, we learned that this administration unilaterally informed about almost 1 million federal workers that they no longer have a union. Just like that, they ripped up their union cards. What they did legal? No. Did they care? No. To strip these workers of their contracts and many more of their livelihoods is completely against the law. But that doesn't matter to them. And unfortunately, the courts are not moving fast enough or aggressively enough to stop this. These are hard-working people. These are people like you and me. These are people from the Veterans Administration working to ensure veterans who bravely served our country get the benefits and services they sacrificed for. These are workers at the National Institute of Health doing cancer research and the CDC working to prevent another destructive pandemic. No more guaranteed wages, no more grievance procedures, no more bargaining. 1 million workers. The illegal union busting is already affecting CWA members as well, as you will hear on this call.
I want to invite
100 CWA members were laid off at the Solidarity Center due to cuts to the USA funding. 100 journalists and tech staff at Radio Free Asia. 1,000 NABET CWA media workers are at risk at NPR and PBS affiliates as Trump and Musk aim to defund public broadcasting. Public sector CWA members have lost their jobs as programs funding have been cut. Funding for broadband deployment and BEAD is at risk. Impending Medicaid cuts will mean significant job loss for frontline and healthcare workers. The list goes on and on. We have a flyer to list all these threats, and we will link it in the chat. Trump ran on reducing the cost of living, but inflation has already gone up since he took office, and our grocery bills are continuing to rise. Instead, he's the union buster in chief. In fact, this is the biggest act of union busting in our nation's history. And make no mistake, I can promise you, they will come after all unions next. If you are a public sector member anywhere, they have you as their next target. And if you work in the private sector, they are working on breaking your union too. Tonight, we'll talk about how this might happen. They know that unions are the last line of defense, preventing the rich owners from taking it from all of us. They know that unions have the resources and the organizational know-how to fight back. They know that the way to move their agenda forward is to bust the union. In CWA, we know how to stand up and fight back, and that's what we have to do. Brothers and sisters, this is a defining moment of our times. There is a powerful growing movement of workers saying enough. Tens of thousands across this country have already taken to the streets. No one voted for union busting. No one voted for this chaos. No one voted for hardworking Americans to lose their Social Security and Medicare. No one voted for the richest person in the world to run our government and make tons and tons of dollars off of it. Since Election Day, Musk has increased his wealth by $154 billion. Let me say that again. $154 billion. If you are ready to fight back, please let me know in the chat. We know that when we fight, we win. Are you ready to fight? If yes, type fight in the chat. Now I'll send it back to Halen. Halen?
Thank you, Dennis. So we were going to turn it over to Chris Dawes from the Federal Workers, but we have a technical problem because the Zoom is at capacity. So we're going to figure out how to let him in. We have so many people on the Zoom, so we're going to do that in a few minutes. So while we do that, I'll hand it over to our Legislative Director, Becca Miller.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight on this really super important issue. Um, so we all know what's going on, right? It's no surprise that the president is doing everything he can to bust the union. And in fact, he told us that he would. Um, in Project 2025. I'm sure many of you remember reading about that. So in just 2 short months, he's made good on this plan, and he has stripped the collective bargaining rights for over 1 million workers. He's shuttered the agencies responsible for upholding and exercising those union rights. Um, and he had like the Federal Mediation Conciliation Service and gutting the National Labor Relations Board. He's decimated the public sector by laying off tens of thousands of federal workers, slashing budgets for public programs across the country. He's destroyed public institutions so that they can be both privatized and profitized.
Oh,
He
wow. Oh,
he knows that he has to do this in order to be successful with his agenda of enriching the billionaire class and exploiting working people. So it's not a surprise that he came after public sector workers first, right? The most dense part of the labor movement. The density there is significantly higher than in the private sector. It's easier to attack because of the laws. But we know that an injury to one is an injury to all. And this is just the start of the attack on every single union member in this country. Our fundamental right to be in a union is absolutely at threat. So right now, the focus on public sector, but we know that this is coming for the private sector. It's just a matter of time of when. So everyone here knows that the private sector labor law is governed by the National Labor Relations Act, and this is the law that gives us the right to have a union, that allows us to organize and to collectively bargain. And this is really the only law, and that's because for a long time, the Supreme Court has held a significant precedent that federal labor law, the NLRA, preempts state law, and that has made it impossible, illegal for states to create their own labor laws. So even to improve upon some of the things with the NLRA, right? But at the same time, the NLRA has been completely under attack, increasingly decimated and dismantled over the last few decades. And the NLRB has been completely stripped of funding and staff and hamstrung by bad Supreme Court rulings. But for all its flaws, the NLRA is what we currently have that gives us the right to have a union, organize, and bargain. And the NLRB, the National Labor Relations Board, is where we go when those rights are threatened. So what could happen here? Well, we've seen Trump withdrawing rights from the public sector left and right. We have no reason to think he'll stop there. In fact, an official White House fact sheet states that President Trump supports constructive partnerships with unions who work with him. So we know what this means, right? He admits in an official fact sheet that he's going to oppose unions that do not bend to his will. And we know that our unions are going to fight back against the billionaire agenda. So the most likely way this will happen is by completely hollowing out the NLRB, but essentially keeping it and keeping the NLRA as a shell to prevent states from moving forward and protecting rights on the state level. So it'll mean that states are still preempted from passing their own state laws and that there'd be nowhere to go. When this happens, employers essentially could start ripping up union contracts. They could stop withholding dues. They could make unilateral, illegal changes to the terms of employment. They could fire at will. And if this happens, where will unions go for help? How will we enforce our rights? What remedies or relief will be available to us? There will be nowhere. There is nowhere. So I want to be explicit about the threat that we're facing. If we're operating in a world where there's no legal protection for the right to have a union, to organize, to bargain, when there's no operational agency that can protect that right, the threat of violating the law in the books, it's gone. The worst case scenario is that opportunities then take that employers then take that opportunity to withdraw recognition. They will reject the union's role as a bargaining representative. They'll no longer withhold the dues. They'll completely bust the union. So this is an all hands on deck situation. It is not an existential crisis. It is coming for all of us. How many of us trust our employers to do the right thing, to honor the union just because we fought for it, just because we did have it, right? The contracts that we've won, that we've sacrificed for. If there's no law or no agency telling them they have to, are our employers going to stand by it? At the end of the call, we're going to share upcoming dates to take the streets because there is only one way to push back against this agenda, and it is by taking to the streets and mobilizing. That is the best way, the most proven way in countries around the world to fight back against this type of attack. The labor movement has to lead the way. So on April 5th, we'll be doing everything we can to tell Trump and Musk and the rest of the billionaire cronies to hands off our union, and we'll see you in the streets. All right, Halen, back to you.
Thank you so much, Becca. All right, now I would like to turn it over to my brother Chris Dawes, president of IFPTE Local 98 in New York City, and on the front lines fighting with federal workers. He's a federal worker at the Army Corps of Engineers. He's also a key leader at FUN, the Federal Unionist Network. Some people call it FU Network, which might be a little bit more appropriate for this moment. But yeah, it's my pleasure to have you here on the call, my brother Chris.
Thank you, Halen, and thank you to everybody who's organizing to turn out on Saturday. Obviously, this is the next day. There's going to be many more mobilizations and much more organizing ahead. I am going to try to use my time to just give like an update, a little bit of background, but mostly an update in what the plan is for federal workers who are organizing. As you just heard, federal workers have just suffered what may be the greatest single, reduction in collective bargaining rights. With a stroke of a pen, more than 1 million federal workers lost I work at the Army Corps of Engineers, which I don't know if government regulations mean anything anymore, but if they do, then I'm required to disclaim that because I mentioned that I work at the Army Corps and I'm here. I have to say that, everything I say does not reflect the views of the Army Corps of Engineers, if that wasn't obvious, but I'm required to. But those of us who work for the Department of Defense and the Veterans Administration and the Centers for Disease Control and the National Institute of Health and a bunch of other agencies have all been, with the stroke of a pen, denied the collective bargaining rights that we've enjoyed for decades. And in the process, this through unilateral decision of the president, it's totally illegal. Let's be clear. Like, the national security exception is supposed to be an exception. It's not supposed to apply to a majority of the federal workforce. But in the process, by unilaterally denying the majority of the federal workforce its collective bargaining rights, this administration has, if it wasn't already declared war, not just on us as federal workers, but on the entire working class. And ultimately, and this is, I think, the thing that's going to make the difference between us putting up a good fight and putting up a fight that wins. This is an attack on the public sphere. This is a handful of privately interested billionaires looking to completely decimate all protections for the public sphere. And that means that it's not just federal workers, and it's not just public sector workers, and it's not just workers who have an interest in stopping what they're up to. It's the entire society. Anybody short of the billionaires themselves who clearly want to remake the terrain in a way that can maximize profit, have the most unprecedented laissez-faire capitalism to wreak havoc on the environment and on our lives, and maximize profits for however many quarters that remain, if they get away with it, because they will in the process completely decimate not just the economy, but also the environment. If they get away with it, they have completely decimated the public sphere. And that's what they're after. This is, neoliberalism cranked all the way up, with complete deregulation of all the ways that they do business, denial of all rights to workers, not just in the federal sector, but if you don't know, if you're not tracking, Elon Musk has a case that he's hoping will make it to the Supreme Court that will rule that the National Labor Relations Administration is itself unconstitutional. They want to gut the entire regime of workers' rights, of environmental protections, of all the services, whether it's healthcare that's provided from Medicaid and Medicare and the Veterans Administration. They want to decimate all aspects of public life. Any public guarantees that create a floor, a minimum standard of living in this country, whether it's the rights that federal workers protect, or it's the environmental protections that we provide, or it's the protections against, the things that the CFPB does, the Consumer Financial Protections Bureau. They're responsible for making sure that banks can't become predatory lenders. And they're obviously all these services that they're after. It's the services that they're after. It's not just us as federal workers. And so as much as we are going to carry out a fight in defense of our interests as federal workers, and we're going to do everything we can to turn our unions into fighting organizations that are willing to use whatever means necessary to stop their agenda, ultimately we're going to need to build out a much broader fight that goes beyond just the labor movement and mobilizes broader society. And ultimately, events like April 5th, events like May Day on May 1st, and it'll take many more beyond that. We need to build a social movement that can match the moment. The scale and severity of their attacks on us must match the scale and severity of a social movement capable of defeating them. We have to make the political price high enough so that they make the decision to scrap their plans and just lie to us. We want Trump to lie to us and tell us he never meant to do this in the first place. But the only way that's going to happen is if we make the political price high enough that he has to throw Musk overboard, that he has to throw the whole thing in retreat and find some way. I really do believe that Trump is above all else interested in his own image. And if we can convince him that the only way to preserve his image in history is to actually throw out the billionaires and return to some, crappy populist vision that doesn't actually accelerate the train that's running over the entire public sphere, then that would be a massive victory. And the momentum we would build as a labor movement, as a social movement in defense of public services would be capable of going on the offensive against him. And hopefully, I do believe that if they are overreaching, then we can make them pay in such a way that the left, that progressive causes, that the labor movement can actually take the momentum. We have to use their momentum against them and actually take momentum. That's only possible if we do real deep organizing. And here I just want to take a moment to make the case for more than mobilization. Yes, April 5th, this Saturday, we need to see everybody out in the streets, Herald Square in New York and all over the country. On May Day, we need to see everybody, anybody who's a leader, anybody who has a following, lead people out, mobilize them. But we also need deep organizing. Organizing is something that anybody can do. Even if you don't have any followers, you can organize your coworkers and become an organic leader, whether it's your coworkers, your neighbors, your fellow congregants at church. Everybody can organize others. And it's just a matter of finding a collaborator, making a list, starting to have meetings, convince them of the necessity of the social movement that we're building, convince them, if they're not already, and they probably are, of the devastation that is being threatened upon us by this administration, and turn them in turn into organizers. Organizing can scale up. That's how things go viral. That's how organizing can become the kind of thing that creates a social movement that's capable of defeating, the kind of authoritarian movement that we're up against. But we have to become organizers. So it's not just enough to turn out. It's not just enough to call on others. We actually have to make organizing our coworkers, our neighbors, our friends, our family, and developing a political framework for understanding how they're getting away with this. And I would just say that the system that they're taking down itself has had a ton of weaknesses that I don't think the labor movement and the broader progressive, the progressive left has sufficiently articulated its criticisms of. Those of us who are federal workers are the best critics of the federal government that are out there. But for some reason, the political right has gotten its criticisms of government as the only criticisms of government. The only way that we're going to be able to rebuild a federal government, let alone stop the attacks on this, are if our criticisms of all the ways in which government doesn't work for regular people become the new narrative. So we need to put federal workers, I think many federal workers are ready to lead and are in the streets and are fighting back. We need to see the broader public sector labor movement with us, and we see it on Saturday with all the unions that are endorsing, and I'm sure that will continue to build. But ultimately, the political content of this movement has to include a criticism of the decades of past government and all the ways that it didn't meet the needs of regular people, because that's what the right has built on. The right has built its reputation on being the more public, prominent, and effective critics of government. And we have to say, we know this government wasn't working for you. We know that historic inequality is the reason for your suffering. We know that that's all a problem. We don't want to go back to the neoliberal government that characterized the last several decades. We want to rebuild after they're done with whatever they're doing. As soon as we stop them, we need to have a positive vision for what the government for regular people can look like. And that is itself going to have to be a very generative and radical proposition. But these are the politics, and this is the organization that's necessary if we're going to be able to defeat the threat that we're up against. We really appreciate all the organizers who are building for this Saturday. please, everybody who's going to be there, leave Saturday and intend to become an organizer in your community and build a vision for a better future country and government that can actually make sure that these kinds of authoritarian movements can be sidelined forever. Thank you all for supporting the Federal Unionist Network and the federal workers and the unions that we're all part of. We really need your solidarity now more than ever.
Wow, thank you so much, Chris. I think everybody's feeling the fire. Everybody, please put some fire in the chat. I saw a lot of love, a lot of fire in the chat. We're all standing with you. So I posted a link in the chat, but Chris, tell us, what can we do? I posted the link to save, Let Us Work in the chat. What can we do to support you?
Yeah, I mean, the Let Us Work campaign is the Federal Unionist Network's initiative to try to develop rapid response capacity. Every time, a chunk of coworkers are fired, we want to put out a call to the broader public for the press conference or the informational picket or the protest that we organize the next day. That is definitely worth signing up for. If you're here in New York, then please consider becoming, taking a pledge to become a friend of Local 98. That's my local, and my local's members have been doing some of the most heroic work and leading the way for the federal labor movement nationally. I dropped the link in the chat before. I'll do it again right now. This pledge is part of the Let Us Work campaign, so you'll automatically be added to that list. But it also is going to be one of the main lists that we use to build for May Day, which of course is going to be the next big national. I mean, there's other stuff in April as well. Higher ed folks are organizing events on the 8th and the 17th. Attend and build those as well. But Local 98 is going to be mobilizing as many federal workers as we can to be part of leading a big mobilization on May Day, which, if you don't know, is International Workers' Day. It's the most important holiday in the labor movement's calendar. And we're going to, the Friends of Local 98 are going to be, part of that rapid response mobilization that we're going to need whenever we need, solidarity. But also we're going to be raising money so that we can put on big, powerful events, so that we can pay staff. The whole federal labor movement is being sapped of resources now because of all the legal battles that we have to fight. So yes, there will be fundraising, but most importantly, there will be organizing. And we need friends of Local 98, friends of the labor of the federal labor movement to come out and show their solidarity. And that's a really good place to start. So you can fill out that form. We just went live with it today, actually. So please become a friend of Local 98's. And then, of course, come out on Saturday.
Amazing. Thank you so much. An injury to one is an injury to all. So we're with you. All right. As we're moving on with our program, I wanted to point out something that's really, really important that I think we need to pay attention to. So they're not only taking our jobs, they're not only taking our collective bargaining rights, but they're taking our voice, right? What's happening right now? They're clearly trying to gut the federal government, gut all the workers' rights that we have, but there's something else going on right now that is really important and really dangerous, and I need us all to pay attention to this. So they're using all these justifications for why they need to dismantle the NLRB, that's why they need to silence workers, right? They're trying to punish us for speaking out. And that is really the biggest attack in this country, right? All these things, union busting, breaking free speech, eliminating due process, all these things work together so they can scare us, they can silence us, so we're not speaking up, right? And so we can't let that happen. I mean, what is going on? What is happening? In this country, we believe in free speech, in freedom, in due process. These are the very basic values that build the foundation of freedom in this country, right? These are the things that separate democracy from dictatorship, not just for citizens, not just for the innocent, but for every single person, right? Every single person deserves due process. We as unionists know that the best, right? That is just cause. The government, much like the boss, they have to have a reason for why they're coming after you. They can't just say you did something and then disappear you, right? They should present evidence. There should be a fair process. Everybody gets to present their side of the story. And if the person is guilty, right? If the boss says, worker's guilty, then there's going to be a process. You prosecute them. But that's not what's happening in this country right now. You all probably have seen it in the news in the last couple of weeks. Plainclothes masked men have disappeared. Several men and women whose speech Trump simply disagrees with. I have to say this again. People have been disappeared in this country in broad daylight. This is not really something that's happening in this country, and we cannot be okay with this. It's Muslims, student protesters, Venezuelans with tattoo. It's people that no one wants to defend, right? And because they're picking on people that no one wants to defend, we're being okay with the fact that their due process, their free speech is being denied. That is a serious threat to the very basic foundation of our country. There was no proof, there was no justification, there was no due process in many of these cases, right? And this is an attack on our democracy, on all our rights, and we really, really have to pay attention to this. They want everybody to be afraid, right? If this keeps going, if everybody is afraid to maybe post something on Facebook that, the Trump administration doesn't like because you might get disappeared, that's not acceptable. So to demonstrate how real this is and how dangerous it is, I want to pass it on to Mike Ippoliti, local president of CWA 1104, to share a message from a graduate worker that we represent who's feeling these threats in a very, very real way.
Good evening, sisters and brothers. My name is Mike Ippoliti, and I'm the president of CWA Local 1104. My local represents workers of Verizon in healthcare, but also in higher education. And tonight, I wanted to share a letter from one of my members. The member currently lives in fear and was too afraid to speak on this call. So I'm reading the letter for them. I think it's important for all of us to understand what's going on in this country. And important to understand that we cannot accept this attack on our free speech rights and our rights to due process, no matter what. We as unionists understand the importance of just cause. We have to fight for whenever it gets violated. We do it in the workplace. We have to do it for our country. Here is the letter. Dear union family, I apologize that I cannot speak to you all in person, as current events have pushed me into anonymity. By current events, I mean the detention and deportation of international students. But first, let me tell you what I can about myself. I came to this country 6 years ago to pursue a degree in higher education. Along with studying, I also worked as part of my degree, and the bulk of my work I did teaching undergraduate classes. When I arrived at my university, the conditions and the pay were almost unbearable. I was paid $24,000 a year. My payments were often late, and the administration ignored our complaints and outreach to ask for the money we were owed. When COVID broke out, we were expected to even more work than before. Fordham graduate students had had enough. We began talking about the difficulties we were facing, and this group grew and grew until we organized with CWA. We won our union, and we became CWA Local 1104 members in April of 2022. Along the way, my life truly changed. Fighting alongside my union family gave me a sense of belonging to this country. My union comrades, all who were citizens, fought for me and for all international students. Our bargaining committee always kept the needs of international students at the forefront, as we were the most vulnerable students in our bargaining unit. We won a lot for international students, including paying time off for visa and immigration proceedings, an emergency fund, and agreements to pay international workers on time. The wage raises we won were vital to international students, as we are not allowed to work off campus and cannot earn extra money. I like to repeat that fighting as a union gave me a strong sense of belonging to this country. Not only did our conditions and pay improve, but we built stronger relationships of solidarity. I've been in this country for 6 years. I've built a life here. I fell in love with and married my husband. I have a life of joy and purpose, and I give back to the communities I belong to. This life is now being threatened. International students like me have become afraid and anxious. Every day we are afraid that there will be a knock on the door and we'll be abducted and sent to a detention center for making a post on Instagram or for no reason at all. There have been incidents of international students who have not participated in any kind of protest or activism being abducted. These detention centers have been described as concentration camps, and frequently people who have been detained are sent to countries that are not their country of origin. These foreign detention centers are notorious for torture, detainees not being allowed to make any calls. We're afraid to visit our families for the fear that we will be detained or deported or our return to our country. It's breaking my heart every day that I will not be able to see my mother or hug my nieces until I don't know when. In this time of incredible hardship and fear, I need my CWA family more than ever. I need you to vow to fight for me and any CWA members who, if we are detained, we will need you to show up whenever we are being held. We need you to come to our campuses if we are called for actions or rallies to push our school administrations to protect us. We need you to remember to keep fighting for us and not forget about us as time passes by. Please do not stop fighting for us. Please do not forget about us. We need you to join the fight against these cruel, horrible policies. I write you from a place of fear and distress, but writing to you gives me courage and bravery because I know when we fight, we win.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was really powerful. It's really horrible and disgusting that our members are facing these terrible threats. Thank you so much for bringing this up. All right. Before we close, I wanted to ask Corey DeSillis, Vice President of Local 1124, to speak for a few minutes. Corey, are you with us? Yeah, you are. Great.
I am on.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you.
wanted to ask you to speak for a few minutes about something that has happened in your area.
Yep. Quickly, there was an ice raid on a large dairy farm here in Jefferson County, which is just geographically, it's about an hour straight north of Syracuse, New York. This happened on Thursday. I also serve as the Democratic chairman of Jefferson County, also in my union job, and we were contacted by the NYSET president, New York State United Teachers, to see if we could support this cause. So since Sunday morning is when I originally got the call, we hopped into action. So why I got involved, well, obviously we got involved because we were asked, but what fueled my passion for this is when I learned how the kids were treated. I spoke with somebody that was there that morning when there was 3 kids and a mother that were detained. I was told that it was very horrific. The kids were screaming. There was obviously federal agents, armed, masked federal agents that took these kids from their home on the farm. So once I learned that, it just, like I said, fueled my fire. So what's happened since then is between myself, our Democratic committee, the NYSET folks, community action groups, we've organized a rally in Sackett's Harbor, New York on Saturday. At the onset of this, I really thought we were only going to have maybe a couple hundred people, but it's garnered national media attention. I've done, I don't know how many interviews since Sunday with all sorts of news outlets, notably the Washington Post, the New York Times, CBC, all local news outlets also. So we organized this rally. Fortunately for us, Tom Homan, who is the administration's border czar, has a house in Sackett's Harbor. So we are going to organize this rally and we are going to march by his house on Saturday afternoon to get our point across. So that's what we've got going on here in Jefferson County with this crazy administration and the crazy things that are happening. So
thank you so much for sharing that, Corey. Can you
what's
tell
that?
us a little bit what motivated you to stand in solidarity and do something about this? I mean, that sounds just horrible. What happened to this family?
It's terrible. So like I said, I talked with somebody, like I said, that was there that morning when this happened, was actually the farm owner. And he described it to me. He's a 70-year-old dairy farmer, been a dairy farmer his whole life. And he explained it to me and he said it's something, and the image of that will be ingrained in his head forever. So, like I said, I got very passionate about that, and we all have kids, and there's no kid anywhere that's a migrant, an immigrant, a U.S. citizen that should be treated that way ever. And I don't like that. And I'm sure most of the people on this call, probably everybody on this call doesn't like that. And certainly I think most of the general public wouldn't like that, wouldn't deal with that. So this is the United States of America. We don't treat people like that, especially children. So I guess I'm very passionate about this at this point. Like I said, this has snowballed into something that is way larger than I ever expected. And we also got some positive news today that the immigration has reached out to one of the teachers in the school district to be a sponsor family for this family. So that's some positive news that hopefully they possibly could be released and on their way back. That would be the best case scenario. If we don't have to have this rally, that would be fantastic. If we get word that the kids are coming home and the mother's coming home also, then we are not going to hold the rally. But as of right now, it's happening.
Thank you.
I also did get a call from the governor last night. Spoke with the governor in person. She vowed her support for this. She actually put out a press release. I don't know if anybody has seen that in regards to this situation. And she is diligently working with Washington and with Holman's office to try to get this situation resolved. So,
Thank you so much
so
for sharing that. And thank
no
you so much
problem.
for doing what you're doing and, standing up in solidarity and support. Again, I think it's really important to point out all these things are connected, right? The attack on workers' rights, firing workers, taking our jobs, taking our rights, taking our voice. And they want us to live in fear. I mean, there's no other reason that explains why would you rip a child in the middle of the night with masked armed men? I mean, it's just completely traumatizing and so awful and so cruel. But I think the cruelty is the point, right? They want people to be afraid. They don't want people to speak up. And that's why it's so important for us that we speak up and it's our right. That's what makes this country great, right? And we have to keep insisting on exercising our rights. Yeah, we're getting to the end of our call, and I would like to hand it back to our great Vice President, Dennis Trainer, to close us out, a great leader in this moment, strongly and so urgently insisting that we have to keep fighting back and that we cannot stay on the sidelines, but we have to make sure we keep our voices heard. And we're not going to make the mistakes in the past again where we didn't get involved. We're going to take this seriously because an injury to one is an injury to all. So back to you, Dennis. Close us out, please. I think you're muted. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Halen, and thank you, Corey. And if they do come home, I saw in the chat you should probably have a victory rally to welcome them home. That would even be something. And thanks, Mike Ippoliti, too, for sharing that letter with us. Let's face it, sisters and brothers. We're at a turning point. In our country, we have never faced a threat to our democracy, a real change at turning into a dictatorship in our entire history. God knows we've had many, many dark, terrible periods in our history, but America never had to face a dictator, an authoritarian leader, a fascist. I know this sounds extreme and like an exaggeration, but I need us all to understand these things don't happen overnight. They happen step by step, and each step tests how far the next step can go, unless it's blocked, unless it's challenged. So this is new for us. We've never had to test how durable our institutions are, what kind of protections our constitutional rights have. But we're about to find out. And as the saying goes, if you're not scared, you're not paying attention. We know the Trump administration does not fear accountability from Congress because they control Congress. We know the Trump administration does not fear accountability from the court because they are defying court orders left and right. We know they are weakening those who challenge them. bullying law firms to stand up to them and into submission, bullying the press into submission. They have bullied universities and anyone who speak up into submission. And the business community is sure as hell not going to speak up. And a good 40% of the country is going to be okay with this, no matter what they do. So that leaves the rest of us. And now they're trying to divide and criminalize the rest of us by dismantling free speech and due process. I want you all to know this. In other countries, when we've seen this happening, some countries have been able to fight against it and restore the democracy. And in those places, the labor movement led the way. This happened in pro-democracy movements in Brazil, South Korea, South Africa, Poland, Italy, everywhere around the world where movements fought dictators, working people were on the front lines. My message to you today is that if there was ever a moment in our country's history, in our union's history, when we as a labor movement needed to stand together, find strength and unity in our diversity, and fight for our freedoms, now is that moment. Now is the time. So how do we do this? We will not be intimidated. We will not be silenced. We will not be bullied into submission. We're the effing labor movement. We have to take to the streets. We have to keep organizing to grow our union. We have to keep educating our members on what's going on. We have to keep mobilizing so members can get involved. So all of us let Trump and the billionaire class know that we're not going down without a fight. You know, our grandparents fought and died for this movement. They organized worker by worker, building strength throughout entire industries. Now we must go back to the lessons of those days. We need to talk to workers one-on-one. We need to build power in every workplace. We need to educate every member about what is at stake at the bargaining table and in Washington. We need to put our bodies on the line. I've never been one to back down from a fight. CWA has never backed down from a fight. This movement is not going to die under my watch. That's why I need all of you to join us in the streets this Saturday, April 5th, and then wherever the fight takes us. Next week, we stand with workers in higher education and veterans. And then on May Day, the labor movement will call on workers to unite all across the country. Let's not get demoralized. That's just what they want. We want to fight for our rights. We have to fight for the world that we want. We're going to fight like hell. We have to show them that we're willing to do that. And I need everyone with me. Sisters and brothers, thank you for joining this call tonight. Have a great evening.
Thank you all so much for joining the call tonight. Have a wonderful evening. I'll see you all on the streets. Solidarity.